What if everything you've ever believed about right and wrong was a lie? What if the very foundation of your morality collapsed overnight? What if the rules you were taught to live by, be kind, be humble, be selfless, weren't eternal truths, but carefully constructed illusions, not to uplift you, but to tame you? What if good and evil weren't absolutes, but tools used by the powerless to restrain the powerful? That's the unsettling possibility Nietzsche forces us to face. That morality, as we know it, may not be a guiding light, but a cage. Nietzsche specifically used philosophy as a hammer against authority to immediately solidify viewer expectations. God is dead, and we have killed him. With those haunting words, Friedrich Nietzsche sent tremors through the foundations of Western thought. He wasn't being poetic or provocative for the sake of it. He was announcing a cultural crisis. The German philosopher was not declaring the literal death of a deity, but something even more unsettling: the collapse of belief in the moral and metaphysical order that had governed Western civilization for centuries. Nietzsche's ideas weren't merely challenging, they were incendiary, and perhaps that's why, more than a century after his death, his name still evokes discomfort, misunderstanding, and fear. Religious authorities, political leaders, even academic institutions, those who hold power, have long found Nietzsche threatening. But why? Let's unravel it. At first glance, it sounds absurd. How could God die? Isn't God supposed to be eternal, immortal? That's exactly why the phrase is so powerful. Nietzsche wasn't saying that God had lived and then suddenly stopped living. He wasn't speaking literally at all. He was making a profound statement about belief. In his 1882 book, The Joyful Wisdom, Nietzsche tells a haunting story. A man walks into a village in broad daylight, holding a lantern. He's looking for God. He keeps asking, "Where is God?" But no one takes him seriously. People laugh. They think he's mad. And then the man says something chilling. God is dead. God remains dead, and we have killed him. This is a cultural, philosophical, and existential diagnosis. What Nietzsche meant was this: in the modern world, belief in God, the kind of belief that once structured human life, that gave people moral direction, purpose, and meaning, was fading. Science, rationalism, and secular philosophy were replacing religion as the dominant forces of understanding. God was no longer the source of truth or morality for many people. The man carries a lantern during the day, a strange act. Light, traditionally, is associated with truth, reason, and divine presence. But the fact that he needs artificial light in daylight suggests something deep and intense, even in an age supposedly illuminated by reason, the Enlightenment, science, progress. A deeper darkness has settled in, a moral and spiritual vacuum. The world seems bright, but something vital is missing. But Nietzsche didn't see this as a victory. In fact, he saw it as a crisis. If God is dead, then what happens to our values? What happens to meaning? If there's no higher power guiding us, then the weight of creating meaning falls entirely on us. And that's not a small thing. That's terrifying. Nietzsche's declaration wasn't triumphant. It was a warning. He saw the death of God as the beginning of a long, dark challenge. A vacuum had opened, and something would eventually have to fill it. Would it be truth? Would it be power? Would it be nothing at all? This, Nietzsche believed, was the real question facing modern humanity. Nietzsche was no ordinary guy. Imagine landing a professorship at just 24 years old, at a prestigious university no less. That's exactly what he did at the University of Basel. Most people would have taken that as a clear sign. Play it safe, stay in line, build a solid academic legacy. But not Nietzsche. He wasn't built for conformity. From the beginning, he stood out, bold, intense, unapologetically original. He thought differently, spoke differently, lived differently. And in some ways, you could say he made life harder for himself on purpose. It's like he refused to coast through life on comfort or convention. Instead, he chose the lonelier path, one filled with questions that made others uncomfortable, ideas that shook foundations, and a style of thinking that didn't quite fit anywhere. But that's also what made him Nietzsche. Friedrich Nietzsche did not arrive in the world quietly. He came roaring through the corridors of Western thought like a storm through a cathedral, shattering idols, tearing down certainties, and declaring, with unsettling calm. To the guardians of tradition, priests, politicians, professors, Nietzsche was not merely controversial, he was dangerous. Not because he advocated violence, but because he threatened something far more powerful: belief. What made Nietzsche such a terrifying force was not that he denied religion, morality, or truth, but that he exposed their human origins. He peeled back the divine and metaphysical justifications for authority and revealed a terrifying possibility: that our moral values are not eternal, but constructed; not sacred, but strategic; not universal, but historical. For Nietzsche, truth itself was not a divine light from above, but a mobile army of metaphors shaped by language, will, and power. He did not whisper these ideas. He declared them in a prophetic voice, mixing aphorism, poetry, and rage. He who fights with monsters, he warned, should see to it that he does not become a monster. Yet it was he whom many came to see as the monster. His books were banned, censored, and twisted. If God is dead, what remains? This is Nietzsche's terrifying question. Without a divine source, what is the ground for morality? What gives life meaning? What stops us from spiraling into despair or relativism? Nietzsche foresaw the rise of nihilism, the belief that life lacks inherent purpose, value, or truth. In the absence of a universal moral code, everything becomes permissible, but nothing feels worthwhile. This is the true danger of God's death, not the disappearance of religion, but the implosion of meaning. Nietzsche's madman warns the crowd not just of loss, but of the abyss to come. What did we do when we unchained this earth from its sun? In killing God, humanity has untethered itself from its axis. We float, directionless. Nietzsche's parable is deeply revelatory. Written in the late 19th century, it anticipates the existential crises of the 20th and 21st centuries, the horrors of world wars, the alienation of modern urban life, the collapse of traditional institutions, and the rise of mass ideologies trying and failing to replace the divine. In a world where consumption replaces communion and algorithms guide our desires, the question, "Where is God?" takes on new weight. The laughter of the marketplace crowd mirrors our own complacency. We ridicule those who ask deeper questions. We distract ourselves with triviality. But the madman knows, without a new foundation, humanity is heading toward a spiritual vacuum. Nietzsche does not end with despair. While his famous proclamation that God is dead shocks and unsettles, it is not meant as a conclusion. It is a beginning. For Nietzsche, the death of God is not just a religious event, it is a cultural and existential one. It marks the collapse of centuries of belief systems, values, and truths that once provided structure to human life. But with this collapse comes a new opportunity. Nietzsche's next step is to attack our existing values and assert that we should not want to preserve them at all. What enabled human beings to emerge from the animal state, he says, was civilization, including everything we mean by culture. And at its core, this civilization was built on the perpetual elimination of the weak by the strong, the incompetent by the competent, the foolish by the clever. But over time, this natural order was overturned. The weak, in order to survive, created a new set of values, ones that glorified humility, self-denial, and pity. Morality, as we know it today, was born not out of strength, but out of resentment. Nietzsche believed these values were a kind of revenge, resentment, a way for the powerless to control the powerful, to make strength itself seem evil. So for Nietzsche, preserving these values doesn't mean preserving truth. It means preserving a lie that keeps humanity small. The madman is a turning point. The people around him do not understand. They mock him, and in a moment of resignation, the madman declares, "I have come too soon." This line is critical. It suggests that the world is not yet ready to confront what the death of God truly means. But even so, the idea has been spoken. The seed has been planted. In the vacuum left behind by the death of traditional values, Nietzsche proposes the figure of the Ubermensch, often translated as the overman or beyond man. This is not a mythological hero or a superior biological being. Rather, the Ubermensch is a symbol of what humanity can become when it confronts the meaninglessness of the universe with strength, creativity, and self-determination. The Ubermensch does not inherit values, he creates them. He does not seek truth in ancient texts or external authorities. Instead, he turns inward and draws meaning from his own experiences, instincts, and visions. He does not retreat into the comfort of old dogmas. He faces life head-on, embracing both its beauty and its brutality. Nietzsche warns against herd mentality, blind obedience, and moral conformity, all foundations of authoritarian rule. He saw in democracy the same flattening of values he despised in religion. And while he abhorred nationalism and dictatorship, his legacy was twisted by the very forces he loathed, turning the philosopher who prized individual excellence into a prophet of collective tyranny. Nietzsche refused to play by their rules. He wrote in parables and fire, not footnotes and logic. He didn't want to explain the world. He wanted to explode it, to create new values, to affirm life even in its chaos and cruelty. The idea of the Ubermensch is deeply unsettling to established authorities. Religious institutions, political regimes, and moral traditions all rely, in one way or another, on the preservation of shared values, values often inherited, rarely questioned. The Ubermensch, by contrast, does not accept values simply because they have been passed down. He interrogates them. He challenges their foundations. He seeks to create his own values based on lived experience, reason, instinct, and creative force. This is a direct threat to systems built on obedience. The Ubermensch does not conform. He does not obey blindly. He is not loyal to tradition for its own sake. And that is precisely why those in power, those who benefit from conformity, view Nietzsche's vision with suspicion, if not outright hostility. Most institutions, especially religious and political ones, rely on the illusion of stability. They teach that values are fixed, eternal, and unquestionable. Whether it's the divine commandments of a church or the nationalistic ideals of a state, authority often presents its moral code as universal truth. To question it is to threaten the order of things. Nietzsche's Ubermensch does exactly that. He lives in flux. He knows that values are not fixed, they are made. And what has been made can be unmade, rethought, reinvented. This is deeply destabilizing to any system that demands loyalty to established norms. For those who hold power, the Ubermensch is dangerous because he cannot be easily controlled. He cannot be bribed by promises of heaven, nor silenced by threats of hell. He creates meaning not for others, but from within himself. He obeys no master but his own becoming. Tyrants prefer obedient subjects. Moralists prefer guilty consciences. The Ubermensch offers neither. Nietzsche's figure is not immoral, but he is beyond the morality designed to make people feel small, ashamed, or afraid. The Ubermensch does not seek forgiveness. He seeks transformation. He is not humble before a higher power. He rises beyond the need for one. This deeply threatens the power structures that rely on guilt and submission. A political leader can rally people under flags and ideologies, but not under uncertainty, not under free thought. A priest can preach obedience and salvation, but not to someone who believes that salvation must come from the self. The Ubermensch is not useful to those who depend on the herd. He walks alone. It is also important to note that Nietzsche's Ubermensch is not a destroyer in the way revolutionaries are often portrayed. He is not a brute force tearing down buildings or thrones. His rebellion is subtler, more radical. He creates. Creation is a more powerful rebellion than destruction because it reveals the fragility of the existing world. If new values can be created, then old ones can lose their power. The Ubermensch offers an alternative way of being, one that does not rely on fear, tradition, or authority, and that is why those in power fear him most. To become the Ubermensch is not a fixed goal, but an ongoing task. It requires constant self-overcoming, a willingness to question, destroy, and rebuild. Nietzsche saw this as the most profound possibility of human life, to create meaning where there is none given, to live fully in a world that offers no guarantees. The death of God is not the end of the story. It is the opening of a new chapter, one that demands more from us, but also offers more freedom than ever before. In the face of nothingness, Nietzsche invites us not to despair, but to rise. He does not tell us what to become. He simply asks, "Now that the old gods are gone, what will you choose to become?" Nietzsche's Ubermensch is a deep invitation to embrace the full potential of human existence through self-transformation. The Ubermensch is not a destination, but a perpetual state of becoming. It represents the idea that life itself is an art, and we are the artist who must shape and mold our own existence. This vision of human potential is one that asks us to constantly evolve, break free from the limitations of conventional thinking, and redefine our purpose and values. The path to becoming the Ubermensch is rooted in the concept of self-overcoming. Nietzsche presents a challenge to constantly push against the boundaries we have inherited, whether they are cultural, religious, or personal. The process is not about achieving a fixed ideal, but about striving, questioning, and perhaps most importantly, recreating ourselves. Nietzsche does not offer us a new dogma, but asks us to create our own. This constant self-overcoming teaches us that growth is not linear, nor is it easy. It requires courage to confront the darkest aspects of ourselves and the world around us. We must be willing to face discomfort, uncertainty, and even suffering, all of which are integral to forging a path of authenticity. By embracing the struggle and questioning the status quo, we move toward deeper self-awareness and true freedom. What Nietzsche offers us is a canvas, and we must paint our own masterpiece. In a world devoid of predefined meaning, we are no longer limited by external authorities or expectations. Our lives are our creation, and we have the power to define what gives us fulfillment. The Ubermensch is someone who takes full responsibility for their life, continually seeking to transcend mediocrity and embrace their personal power to create meaning. Nietzsche's philosophy represents a radical departure from conventional thought, particularly in its challenge to the structures of power that sustain the status quo. Central to his vision is the idea that every individual has the potential to transcend societal limitations and embrace their fullest capabilities. Nietzsche's critique of the herd mentality, the collective mindset that prioritizes conformity and mediocrity over individual strength, poses a direct threat to those in positions of power. The powerful elites, whether political, religious, or cultural, have long relied on suppressing individual potential to maintain control, making Nietzsche's philosophy a powerful and unsettling challenge to their dominance. The Ubermensch embodies the pinnacle of human development, an individual who has transcended the limitations imposed by societal norms and values. This idea is not a call for supremacy over others, but for the supremacy of the self, an individual who creates their own values and meaning in a world that, according to Nietzsche, lacks inherent purpose. The Ubermensch rejects the traditional morality that has been established by the masses and the powerful, instead choosing to live by their own principles, defined not by external authority, but by an internal will to power. Nietzsche's concept of the will to power is central to his philosophy and reflects his unique vision of humanity. The will to power can be understood as the fundamental driving force behind human actions, not merely a desire for survival or reproduction, but a deeper, more existential urge to exert one's influence, shape the world, and transcend limitations. It is a striving for growth, mastery, and creativity, an expression of life's inherent drive to assert itself. For Nietzsche, this concept is deeply tied to his critique of traditional morality, particularly Christian values, which he saw as life-denying and restrictive. He argued that these values promote meekness, self-sacrifice, and submission, suppressing the natural will to power that leads individuals to embrace their potential and create new values. Nietzsche believed that true greatness comes from embracing one's own power and individuality, rejecting external authorities that impose conformity. His vision of humanity, his will to power, reflects his ideal of the Ubermensch, often translated as Overman or Superman, who is able to transcend conventional morality and live authentically. The Ubermensch is not bound by traditional values or external constraints, but creates their own purpose and meaning in life. He certainly embodies the ultimate realization of the will to power, continuously striving for self-overcoming and self-mastery. Nietzsche viewed humanity as a dynamic process, constantly evolving and seeking to overcome itself. He rejected static, deterministic views of human nature and instead embraced the idea that individuals have the power to shape their own destinies. In this sense, humanity's greatest potential lies in its ability to affirm life in all its complexity, with all its challenges and contradictions, rather than succumbing to nihilism or resignation. Ultimately, Nietzsche's vision of humanity is one of strength, creativity, and freedom, an ongoing process of becoming in which individuals are driven by the will to power to transform themselves and the world around them. The herd mentality, which Nietzsche vehemently criticizes, refers to the way in which society collectively adheres to conventional beliefs, values, and norms without questioning their validity or relevance. For Nietzsche, the herd is a reflection of mediocrity and conformity, driven by fear and the desire for security rather than a pursuit of greatness. The powerful institutions, whether political or religious, benefit from this herd mentality, as it ensures that the masses remain passive and unchallenged. By keeping people bound to these inherited values, the elites can maintain control over society, preserving their status and power. Nietzsche's philosophy, in contrast, offers a vision of human beings as creators of their own destinies. His ideas suggest that individuals are not meant to live in subjugation to the powerful, nor are they destined to be bound by outdated systems of morality. Instead, Nietzsche challenges each person to recognize their own potential and to break free from the societal structures that keep them subdued. His vision encourages self-empowerment and the rejection of societal norms that limit individual freedom and growth. This vision is not merely an abstract ideal, but a call to action for each person to question the status quo, to push beyond the limits of the herd, and to strive for something greater. Nietzsche's ideas represent a profound existential challenge to all who seek to maintain the current power structures. His philosophy encourages individuals to tap into their inner strength and to rise above the forces that seek to suppress them. In this way, Nietzsche's critique of the herd mentality and his call for the realization of human potential remain as relevant today as they were in his time, posing a direct threat to those who benefit from maintaining a society of conformity and passive obedience. Nietzsche saw himself as the philosopher of the future, but his gaze pierced the present like a blade. He shattered the comfortable illusions that underpinned morality, authority, and identity. And what he offered in return was no dogma, no system, but a challenge. Become who you are. Nietzsche cut through the moral codes of his time. He understood that once belief in God fades, you can't just keep clinging to the same old notions of good and evil as if nothing has changed. To do so, he argued, would be an act of self-deception. Compassion, humility, charity. These weren't objective truths handed down from above. They were, in Nietzsche's radical view, cultural constructs. In fact, they were the inventions of the powerless. In the genealogy of morality, Nietzsche traces how values like kindness and selflessness emerged, not as natural virtues, but as weapons of resentment. What really arouses indignation against suffering, he writes, is not suffering as such, but the senselessness of suffering. In ancient societies like Homeric Greece, values were shaped by the strong, warriors, aristocrats, rulers. They prized honor, strength, beauty, courage, and dominance. The noble type of man experiences itself as value-creating, Nietzsche writes. They said yes to life, and in that affirmation they defined the good. But the weak, the slaves, the sick, the marginalized were left behind. Resentful, bitter, and powerless, they underwent what Nietzsche calls the slave revolt in morality. The beginning of the slave's revolt in morality occurs when resentment itself becomes creative and gives birth to values. Thus were born values like meekness, humility, and pity, not out of virtue, but out of vengeance. They call the strong evil, he writes, precisely because they are good according to the morality of resentment. Out of their weakness, Nietzsche argues, they forged a new moral code, a code that flipped the old values upside down. Power, once noble, became evil. Meekness and suffering became good. This Nietzsche called slave morality, a moral system born not of virtue, but of revenge and survival. To the powerful of any age, this is a deeply uncomfortable claim. It implies that morality isn't eternal, that doing the right thing is often just a cultural story we tell ourselves. And once you expose morality as historical and psychological, not divine or universal, you strip away a key tool of control. Nietzsche wasn't just a philosopher, he was a disruptor, a thinker who tore apart every comfortable belief we had about morality, authority, and even what it means to be a human being. His ideas were and still are unsettling because they challenge the very foundations on which power structures are built. When Nietzsche talks about power, he's not just talking about people who have wealth, military might, or control over others. He's talking about something deeper, the architects of the moral systems that hold society together. One of the key insights in Nietzsche's philosophy is that the powerful aren't just the ones who rule with force. They're the ones who define what's right and wrong, what's good and evil. They are the ones who create the moral codes that allow them to keep control. And here's the thing. Nietzsche thought these moral systems weren't divine or eternal truths. They were made up. They were social constructs designed by those in power to preserve their position and influence. Take religion, for example. In many traditional societies, religious moralities sanctify the role of rulers and priests. These figures are seen as God's representatives on earth, chosen to guide and govern the people. But Nietzsche was a truth-teller, and he wasn't afraid to pull the curtain back on these divine claims. He argued that morality was not handed down from God. It was created by humans, particularly by the weak, to counterbalance the power of the strong. As Nietzsche puts it in Beyond Good and Evil, the noble type of man experiences itself as value-creating. It does not need the approval of others. This idea is massive. What Nietzsche is saying here is that true power comes from the individual, the person who creates their own values, who doesn't need the validation or approval of society or anyone else. This flies in the face of everything we've been taught, that morality is objective, fixed, and tied to divine commands. Nietzsche is saying, nope, it's all made up, and the powerful know how to use it to stay in control. The Ubermensch is a direct challenge to the entire framework of power that has existed for centuries. Think about it. The moral codes that have governed societies for millennia have typically valued traits like humility, meekness, and caring for the weak. The Ubermensch rejects all of that. He embraces strength, individualism, and self-affirmation. In Nietzsche's world, the Ubermensch isn't a villain, but a new kind of human being. One who doesn't rely on inherited values, but creates new ones for themselves. This idea would be incredibly threatening to the powerful, because it's a direct rejection of everything they've built their authority on. If people start thinking like the Ubermensch, society's entire moral structure could unravel. If no one needs approval, if everyone can create their own values, then who needs rulers, priests, or institutions that enforce the status quo? What they would need is their own will to power, and this will to power must arise from human intelligence and wisdom, the ability to open our eyes, to observe, and to see through the banality of the very system that claims to protect us. But that system, in truth, is nothing less than a parasite, feeding on human ignorance, thriving on our unquestioning obedience. But Nietzsche doesn't just critique the powerful from a distance. He goes straight to the heart of their power, the very moral systems they've used to justify their control. If morality is a social construct, then the entire moral code that has kept the powerful in charge is based on a lie. This is where Nietzsche's ideas get really uncomfortable. Nietzsche wasn't just challenging moral codes for the sake of it. He was shaking the foundations of power itself. He was saying that the very system that gives legitimacy to the powerful, the system that keeps the weak in check, might be rooted in resentment and self-interest, not in truth or justice. This is a terrifying thought, because it means that the authority of the powerful could be completely questioned. If morality is just a historical construct, a set of values born out of envy or power struggles, then the powerful are no better than anyone else. They're not divine or ordained. They're just people who have figured out how to keep control. This is where Nietzsche opens the door to rational skepticism, a sense that all values are groundless. If the powerful are maintaining their position not through inherent truths, but through constructed moral systems, then everything they've built could fall apart. What happens when society starts questioning the very moral codes that hold it together? Does chaos follow? Or, as Nietzsche might argue, is this the only way to break free from false morality and create something new? Nietzsche wasn't just writing philosophy for philosophers. His work was a call to arms. His critique of the powerful wasn't just intellectual, it was existential. For Nietzsche, this was a matter of life and death. He believed that in order for individuals to live fully, they had to free themselves from the moral chains that society had placed on them. He challenged the powerful and everyone else to stop relying on inherited values and to create new ones, to embrace the chaos of a world without predefined moral guidelines. This was a direct challenge to the structures of power because it required the powerful to relinquish control over the moral narratives they had carefully crafted to maintain dominance. The powerful, in Nietzsche's view, had to face the uncomfortable reality that the morality they had upheld for so long was not an eternal truth. It was simply a tool for maintaining their control. But here's the kicker. Nietzsche's ideas weren't just for the oppressed or the marginalized. They were for anyone who was willing to question everything. He didn't want us to accept the status quo just because it's always been there. He wanted us to dig deep, to see the truth behind the systems of power, and to create new values that are more authentic, more life-affirming. This is why the powerful have always feared Nietzsche. He didn't just challenge their authority in the obvious ways, by questioning the legitimacy of kings, rulers, or religious leaders. He challenged the very moral codes that allowed them to justify their power. By exposing those moral codes as constructs, Nietzsche didn't just destroy the illusions the powerful had built for themselves. He left them with nothing but the harsh truth. The idea that morality could be questioned, undermined as a tool of resentment, power, and survival, is something the powerful have always feared, because it pulls the rug out from under their feet. Nietzsche's philosophy invites us all to create our own path, free from the restrictions of outdated moral systems. It's a call for radical freedom. But it's also a terrifying one, because it forces us to confront the possibility that everything we've been taught about right and wrong might be completely wrong. So, if you ever wonder why the powerful fear Nietzsche, now you know. He wasn't just criticizing rulers, priests, or governments. He was challenging the very foundation of power itself, urging individuals to think for themselves, create their own values, and live authentically. And that's something the powerful have always been terrified of. Nietzsche didn't stop there. He looked ahead. His Ubermensch isn't a comic book superhero. It was his vision of a future human who would transcend traditional moral codes, someone unafraid to create new values, someone who didn't need external approval or divine commandments to live a meaningful, powerful life. To Nietzsche, the Ubermensch represented the next evolutionary leap, a creator of meaning in a godless world. But for religious institutions and moral traditionalists, this was heresy. And for political regimes, it was dangerous. If individuals could create their own values, how would you control them? How would you enforce law, loyalty, obedience? Nietzsche's Ubermensch was not a citizen. He was not a subject. He was, in many ways, ungovernable. Nietzsche was not a philosopher of contentment. He was a philosopher of confrontation. He forced humanity to look in the mirror and question everything: our gods, our morals, our values, our very sense of purpose. In a world where power often thrives on myth, obedience, and moral consensus, Nietzsche's message was subversive. He refused to flatter humanity. He believed that most people were afraid of truth, preferring the safety of illusions. But for those few willing to face the abyss, the free spirits, the philosophers of the future, he offered something rare, the terrifying, exhilarating freedom to build meaning in a godless world. The powerful fear Nietzsche, not because he tells people what to think, but because he dares them to think for themselves. You must be willing to burn in your own flame. How could you rise anew if you have not first become ashes? These lines encapsulate a central theme of Nietzsche's Thus Spoke Zarathustra, the necessity of destruction as a prelude to true creation, or what Nietzsche elsewhere calls self-overcoming. The flame here is both a symbol of suffering and purification. It represents the intense internal struggle required to destroy one's old self, outdated values, inherited beliefs, and the false comforts of the herd. The metaphor of burning in your own flame evokes the myth of the phoenix, the bird that must first perish in fire before it can be reborn. For Nietzsche, this is not merely poetic. It is the existential demand of the Ubermensch. One cannot become this evolved self without first confronting and annihilating the parts of themselves that are cowardly, conventional, or dependent on external validation. Before anything new can rise, something old must fall. Reconstruction does not begin with comfort, it begins with rupture. With cracks in the walls we once leaned on. The path to creation winds through destruction, through the breaking down of illusions, systems, and selves. It is in the ruin, in the scattered pieces of what once seemed unshakable, that the seeds of something greater are sown. To build a freer, fuller existence, we must first dare to let the old world collapse. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Zarathustra is Nietzsche's new man, a figure who preaches not salvation through divine grace, but transformation through struggle. The idea of burning in one's own flame implies a solitary, painful journey, a departure from comfort and security. It is a rejection of the herd mentality, the moral structures of organized religion, and the passivity of modern man. Nietzsche's Zarathustra proclaims that this inner fire, this passionate will to overcome the old self, is the only path to spiritual rebirth. Becoming ashes is not a defeat, but a necessary step in this rebirth. It signifies humility before the task of self-creation. One must shed inherited illusions, confront their own weaknesses, and let their former self die. Only then can one rise anew, not as a purified version of the past self, but as something entirely new, the creator of new values, the author of one's own destiny. These lines also subtly reject the Christian ideal of redemption through suffering as passive endurance. Nietzsche's flame is not about martyrdom or submission. It is about active, creative destruction. It is the fire of autonomy, of courage, of becoming. It is the kind of pain that transforms, not the kind that simply purifies for a higher, external good. In this sense, Nietzsche's call is profoundly existential and individualistic. It invites the reader to accept that transformation requires not only discomfort, but the total disintegration of old identity. It is only through this radical and terrifying honesty, through the symbolic burning, that one can ascend toward becoming what Nietzsche calls the meaning of the earth. For Nietzsche, the institutions that claim moral authority, whether the church, the state, or systems of education, function not as agents of enlightenment or empowerment, but as tools of control. They encourage passivity, obedience, and fear, suppressing the very instincts and drives that make individuals powerful and creative. Nietzsche tears down the pillars propping up the existing order, shattering the belief in absolute morality, timeless truths, and divine authority that once gave it strength. He exposes how control is manufactured, not just through violence, but through culture, belief, and fear. His call to become who you are is more than a call to self-expression. It is a revolutionary act of self-creation that breaks the chains of conformity. In the end, Nietzsche does not simply rebel against institutions. He rebels against the very idea that humans should be ruled by anything other than their own creative, evolving will. His philosophy is dangerous to the powerful because it refuses to be tamed, refuses to settle, and insists that every individual has the power to break free from the ties and lies that bind them. Nietzsche's philosophy is not just intellectually provocative, it is dangerously liberating. It shakes the very foundations upon which societies, religions, and moral orders have been built for centuries. His will to power is not a call to dominate others, but a call to master the self, and therein lies its radical challenge. Because in a world structured by obedience, conformity, and moral absolutes, Nietzsche dares to say, the highest virtue is not submission, but self-overcoming. This is a philosophy that doesn't just question authority, it renders it irrelevant. And this is what makes Nietzsche dangerous. His philosophy strips power away from priests, politicians, and ideologues who depend on mass obedience. It asks the terrifying question, what if morality isn't universal? What if guilt is a tool, not a truth? What if you could live beyond good and evil? For the powerful, such ideas are deeply unsettling. Nietzsche doesn't just threaten a political order, he threatens the very grammar of belief that holds societies together. In a world where systems survive by convincing people that humility is a virtue, Nietzsche praises pride. Where religion sanctifies suffering and self-denial, Nietzsche celebrates the fullness of life, including its pleasures and its dangers. Where institutions promise salvation through obedience, Nietzsche proclaims freedom through self-responsibility. Freedom is the will to be responsible for ourselves. That's not just freedom, that's revolution. And revolutions frighten those who benefit from the status quo. The will to be is not ambition in the corporate sense. It is existential rebellion. It's the force that says, I will not be given a life. I will make a life. Even if it costs me everything. Even if the world misunderstands me. That kind of freedom, raw, untamed, unapologetic, is rare. And when it appears, the powerful tremble. Not because the free will destroy them, but because they reveal that their control was always an illusion. Nietzsche reminds us that the greatest threat to tyranny is not rebellion, it's authenticity. Because once a person becomes truly responsible for themselves, no one else can rule them. Nietzsche's confidence in human rationality was extreme, bold, poetic, and entirely unapologetic. His prose, forged in fire and sharpened like a blade, did not simply express ideas, it challenged entire systems. That's why it unsettled the powerful, because it trusted the individual more than the institution, the self more than the structure. His faith lay not in dogma, but in the raw, unrelenting capacity of the human spirit to grow through struggle. At the heart of Nietzsche's vision lies the idea that conflict is not a curse, but a crucible. Life, to him, was not something to be passively endured or morally tamed. It was something to be wrestled with, shaped, and owned. He believed that every challenge, every hardship, every confrontation with pain was an opportunity to become something greater, not by avoiding suffering, but by transforming it. The will to power is not a shallow thirst for dominance over others. It is the deep, existential impulse to rise above one's limitations, to strive, to transcend. It is the fire that drives a person to overcome fear, push through resistance, and evolve beyond the roles society assigns. This force, this urge to become, is not just natural, it is necessary. Without it, we remain static, fragile, compliant. With it, we are capable of becoming who we truly are. And here is where the life lesson lives. Resilience is not the absence of struggle, it is born through it. We become resilient not by being protected, but by being tested. Each setback is not a defeat, but a forging. Each failure is a lesson in self-creation. Every time we break, we gain the chance to rebuild, wiser, stronger, more self-aware. In a world that often sells comfort as the highest good, Nietzsche reminds us, comfort is not growth. To truly live, to own your life, is to confront chaos without flinching, to choose your path even when it is steep, and to believe, stubbornly, fiercely, that you can rise. So when life tests you, when the world seems hostile or indifferent, remember this. Your strength does not come from avoiding pain. It comes from turning toward it and saying, this too will shape me. Far from being a cold doctrine of dominance, the will to power, when understood in its richer sense, can be seen as a principle of inner healing, self-overcoming, and profound self-help. At its core, the will to power is the drive within every living being to assert, expand, transform, and elevate itself. It is the inner force that does not simply want to survive, but to thrive. Not merely to repeat what has been, but to become more. For Nietzsche, this will is more fundamental than the will to pleasure or the will to survive. It is the deep, often unconscious force behind creation, growth, and renewal. Modern self-help literature often focuses on positivity, motivation, and simple behavioral change. Nietzsche offers something more demanding, and ultimately more liberating. He does not offer quick fixes or comforting illusions. Instead, he challenges individuals to embrace their struggles, confront their deepest fears, and transmute suffering into strength. In this way, the will to power becomes a powerful framework for personal development, not through denial or avoidance, but through radical self-confrontation and creative transformation. Where much of the self-help genre teaches people to escape pain, Nietzsche teaches how to integrate pain. "What does not kill me makes me stronger," he writes, an aphorism that has become a modern mantra, but is often stripped of its original context. For Nietzsche, strength is not about muscle or dominance, but about the ability to grow through adversity, to draw energy from failure, and to turn wounds into wisdom. This is not a passive process. It requires active engagement with life's chaos and the courage to rebuild the self after every fall. Nietzsche's vision of healing is inseparable from his vision of becoming. He does not believe in a return to some idealized wholeness or a cure in the traditional sense. Rather, to heal is to transform, to rise anew, not despite our scars, but because of them. Healing, in Nietzsche's terms, demands a kind of heroism, the willingness to let the old self die so that a new self, more vibrant and self-authored, can emerge. This is the will to power, not as control over others, but as mastery over one's own destiny. One of Nietzsche's most scathing critiques is directed at the morality of victimhood, the idea that weakness is a virtue and power is inherently evil. In modern psychological and cultural contexts, this can translate into a mindset where individuals see themselves as defined by their traumas, oppressions, or misfortunes. Nietzsche's will to power asks us to flip that script, not by denying pain or injustice, but by refusing to let it define the totality of who we are. To embrace the will to power is to declare, "I will not be reduced to what has happened to me." It is a call to move from resentment to responsibility, from passivity to creation. This is the Nietzschean form of self-help. Do not seek healing from the outside, generate it from within. Finally, Nietzsche's will to power offers a blueprint for existential self-help, the task of creating one's own values. In a world where old systems, religious, moral, political, are crumbling or losing relevance, Nietzsche invites us to become value creators. He who has a way to live, he says, can bear almost any how. This why cannot be inherited. It must be forged in the fire of one's own experience. The will to power, then, is not about imposing one's will on the world, but about discovering and actualizing one's truest potential in the face of uncertainty. It is the inner compass that guides us through life's abyss, not with guarantees, but with the dignity of authorship. Nietzsche's philosophy is not for the faint-hearted, but for those willing to face themselves with honesty and intensity. His will to power offers more than a theory. It offers a challenge to stop waiting for rescue, to stop blaming fate, and to start becoming the kind of person who can carry the weight of their own existence. In this, the will to power becomes a profound principle of healing, not through comfort, but through courage, not through escape, but through transformation. Nietzsche does not speak only to philosophers or elite minds. He speaks to everyone who has ever struggled, suffered, and yet yearned to rise again. At the heart of his philosophy is an unshakable belief in the transformative power of the individual. He teaches humanity resilience in the face of despair, the courage to fight one's own inner battles, and the strength to become what one truly is. In a world that too often rewards conformity and submission, Nietzsche's call to self-overcoming, to becoming one's own highest version, stands as both a challenge and a beacon. Nietzsche doesn't just want us to endure life, he wants us to celebrate it in its fullest form, with all its contradictions, its imperfections, and its fleeting beauty. The challenge is to not merely exist, but to engage in life so wholeheartedly that we would embrace its repetition without hesitation. Imagine for a moment the radical shift in perspective this would demand of us, to truly own each moment, to live with such passion and intensity that we would be willing to experience every joy and sorrow, every triumph and failure, over and over again. This doesn't mean surrendering to life's chaos passively. It means becoming the artist of your own existence, the creator of your own meaning. Life, in all its complexity, is a canvas, and you are both the artist and the medium. The mundane is no longer mundane. The small, routine moments of our daily existence, the laughter shared over dinner, the quiet solitude of a walk, the challenge of confronting failure, all become opportunities for profound transformation. The Ubermensch is not a tyrant or a cold-blooded dominator. It is a vision of human potential at its peak. It is the individual who has suffered, broken, rebuilt, and emerged stronger, who no longer clings to external validation or inherited values, but lives according to their own self-created purpose. He represents not unattainable perfection, but the possibility within every human being to rise above mediocrity, herd mentality, and victimhood. It is a call to those willing to suffer consciously, to burn in their own flame, and to be reborn, not just healed, but transformed. To read Nietzsche is to stand at the edge of one's own abyss and choose not to fall, but to leap, to create, and to become. In a world increasingly drawn toward external solutions, his legacy reminds us that the most intense revolution begins within. The imaginative, the daring, the creative, the bold, the courageous, the curious, the brave, nature's true leaders, should be free. Free from the chains of slave morality. Free to rise above the timid rules of the flock. Free to live life to the fullest, to fulfill themselves without shame or apology. But for too long, we've been told that our strength is dangerous, that ambition must be tamed, that pride is a sin. These are not truths, they are tools designed to keep the exceptional in check. Nietzsche calls us to something higher. Look at the herd, safe, obedient, and small. They follow rules they never questioned. They inherit values they never chose. Take a moment right now and reflect. Are you living by your own values, or are you still trapped in someone else's rules? Nietzsche reminds us that the greatest courage is not to follow the herd, but to step out and create your own path. So ask yourself honestly, what's one belief you've inherited that no longer serves you, and how will you break free from it? Share your story in the comments below. Your insight might just be the spark someone else needs to begin their own journey toward freedom. If this message resonated with you, hit like and subscribe. Join our growing community of fearless thinkers determined to live authentically, boldly, and beyond the chains of outdated morality. Remember Nietzsche's powerful words. You must be willing to burn in your own flame. How could you rise anew if you have not first become ashes? Your journey of becoming starts right now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.